Genuine playfulness is one of the most accessible, enjoyable, and transformative therapeutic mindsets for anyone who's working their way through unresolved childhood trauma or multi-level internal conflict. Because dysregulated emotion, which is when the highs are too high and the lows are too low, is ultimately the core wound of every personality disorder or psychopathology. But playfulness is self-liberation and self-regulation combined together, especially for anyone who's an overachiever and has spent multiple decades compulsively chasing after status, wealth, social attractiveness, or any other success metric. In this video, I'm going to be introducing some of the key findings from neuroscience and neurobiology and modern traumatology to show you a way to move from that state of internal combustion and chronic destabilizing highs and lows to a place of predictable, peaceful self-centeredness without sacrificing the ability to engage in the world with passion, direction, and forwards drive. Ultimately, it is possible to have a playful mindset and a playful experience of the world without becoming weak and passive and disengaged from social responsibility. I say this with intention, and the reason that I say this is that I know anyone who's watching this video who's a type A, success-driven, overachiever type of person may scoff at the very idea of playfulness as being for babies, for being for weak-minded, passive, social dropouts who have no desire to engage with the world. But the reality is that if you were to adopt a little more playfulness at the beginning and then a lot more playfulness into your daily bodily experience of life, that you would have a hell of a lot more free energy to be able to contribute back to society and solve those great intellectual challenges and creative ventures that you're going through without being disembodied or choosing to live in more dissociative speculation as if that would be the cure for depression and hyper-intellectualism. Dense introduction, but in a nutshell, what we're going to explore in this video is the science of play. So where do we begin? We'll begin where we always begin, with today's inner work essential, which is conveniently called Play and Creativity in Psychotherapy. This is the second or maybe the third book in the Norton series on interpersonal neurobiology from this series. It's leading off from the last episode where we looked at the brain science of self-regulation and looking specifically at the impact of play therapy. Play therapy is something which kind of has a bad reputation, especially amongst men. I definitely couldn't relate to the idea of playing my way to health when I was a very intense, success-driven kind of guy. I knew I was suffering, I knew I had an intense internal world, but the idea that I could hold my life lightly and have a playful, flowing attitude towards life, and then have all the healing benefits and self-regulating benefits that come with that was completely beyond my perception. So my intention with this video is to introduce that concept to you with enough force without it being pressure, and share a few quotes from this book to launch us into the idea of play being a self-regulator and a self-liberator. So back to the book, which is a series of essays from different contributors in the field. Everyone's got multiple decades of experience. They're not pulling this out of their arse. If you think I'm full of shit, well, that's okay, but listen to a few of these quotes first and maybe make your mind a bit more challenged about your preconceptions. So, a closer look at play. Chapter 2, I'm going to read a quote that will frame our conversation. This is from Stuart Brown and Madeline Eberle. Not sure how to say that. Eberle. Quote, "What is play? Play is a state in which we flirt with reality, turning it to pleasurable ends this way and that, thereby expanding our potential for creativity. Characterized by imagination and risk-taking, this play state invites delight and surprise, quiets a chattering mind, and grants temporary relief from worry. A bit further down, what is play? To be considered play, the experience must be apparently purposeless and done for its own sake. Play is voluntary. It frees the player from a sense of time pressure. It has improvisational potential. It is inherently pleasurable, and we yearn for more when it's gone. While in a state of authentic exuberance, we delightfully engage with a playmate, play object, or playful thought. And you might be thinking, well, Jordan, that's great, but how is this going to help me with my childhood trauma and existential dread? Well, I'll skip a little bit further into the book and I'll tell you how this has healing effects. Looking at the play science. Play science, and this is decades of research, decades, you can go all the way back to the 50s with research into child development and how children develop through play and socialization, so at least 70 years of research on this, which is especially important to look to if you didn't have such a playful childhood and you were deprived of normal social experiences. Please pay attention to this. This is why it's relevant. Play science has been shown to complement therapy and especially drug therapy. Application of the proper play types can reduce and perhaps eliminate the need for drugs in the management of mild to moderate ADHD. Releasing excess hyperactivity through play could indeed achieve many of the same effects as the paradoxical calming of a psychostimulant. Now that's liberating, but let's make it more broad. Quote continues. The same is thought to be true when dealing with other such afflictions as depression, autism spectrum disorders, obesity, vulnerability to addictions, and obsessive-compulsive disorders. And then we get into play personalities. There's another quote that I was going to read from you, but I realize that I'm reading many quotes here. We're going to ultimately take this conversation to the place of looking at the 5 distinct play personalities. These are the 5 ways that generally we like to play, and my invitation, of course, to you is to play more. I'm just trying to whet your appetite. There is so much wonderful research in this book, Play and Creativity in Psychotherapy, for you to dive right into. The point I want to emphasize for the sake of this video is you likely have 1 out of 5 distinct play personalities that you will tend to find flow state in the most often. Again, play is that point of enthusiastic and creative engagement with the world, which is particularly important if you tend to be more of a meditative, maybe existentially based, somewhat skeptical kind of person who looks at the world with a healthy sense of pessimism and maybe a sense of detachment from people around you, family, friends, even loved ones, romantic partners, because we're not quite there. We're not quite in the world. Usually these kinds of people have some level of disembodiment. They tend to live from the neck upwards with maybe isolated bursts of activity in their genitals or in their mouth, which again is still from the head up. And at the worst, a dissociative tendency to be above and behind oneself, to feel like you're existing above yourself, or maybe like you're playing a video game and not really a real person. We combat that with play. Some science would say that the reason that we feel this way is that during our childhood years and adolescent years, we didn't get enough playful attention from our parents. Kind of a shocking idea. I'm not trying to blame anyone or say it's all our parents' fault. But the research would suggest that we have a distinct play personality and that this impacts our way of engaging with the world in a creative, exuberant sense. So what are these 5 play personalities? Excuse me, some allergies. I'll read you a quote. Again, this is from the book. The artist, the joker, the collector, the narrator, the kinesthete might reside within us all, but it's fair to say that we each lean towards one specific play personality. And then the play personality that we possess, there's 5 of them. I'm going to read straight from the book. Really small little quote here, but keep your ears open and listen inwards to yourself and see which one resonates the most. You'll likely have 3 as your core 3, and we'll go into them. Not too much detail, because you're a grown adult. I don't need to describe play to you, hopefully, with too much intensity. You should be able to understand the idea of playing being pleasurable, and then we'll wrap it back around to the idea of why you should prioritize time chunks every day to be a little bit more playful, hopefully based on one of your 5 play personalities. Play personality number 1, object play. Number 2, social play. And then body play, caregiving play, and exploratory play. A little bit more detail now. Object play involves the desire, pleasure, and satisfaction to tinker, construct, tear down, and use tools. Social play involves the desire, pleasure, and satisfaction to chat, flirt, tease, and joke around. Body play involves the desire, pleasure, and satisfaction to dance, jump, run, touch, and tickle. Caregiving play involves the desire, pleasure, and satisfaction to nurture pets or encourage a friend. I like that one. Nurture pets or encourage a friend, like they're in the same category as stroking a puppy and giving a friend a pat on the back. It's nice, isn't it? Exploratory, you can tell which preference I have there, it just came through. Exploratory play involves the desire, pleasure, and satisfaction to risk, assemble, and execute a plan, and to seek adventure. That one's also a really good one. So there we go. 5 types of play. There are many examples we could go into of how this looks in childhood and adulthood. I could give a few off the top of my head to just really give you an example of how to implement play in your daily life, or at least prioritize the right type of play for self-regulation, to be in a state of aimless purposelessness, no productivity seeking, just genuinely healthy self-restorative pleasure. Object play is pretty obvious, using tools, using resources. This is the man who likes to work on cars. This is the woman who, I suppose to a degree, likes to do things like sewing or crafts or handicraft of some sort or another. I'm giving very gendered stereotypes, especially for men who are watching this video, because the reality is that this is going to be not so popular amongst men. So yeah, it's playing with your car. It's playing with tools. It's DIY projects. That is object play, and it also works for handicrafts too. Social play, obvious. This is when we're going out and seeing friends. Body play, well, this is a variety of different things. It could be fitness and exercise. It also has a sexual element, especially the tickling element. I know some people like to be tied down and tickled. I'm not sure how many viewers watching this video like that in particular, but it's definitely a thing, and the wider range of sexuality is also definitely a thing. Caregiving play with pets, pretty good. Encouraging a friend, that's a special one that has a place in my heart. And then exploratory play. This one I want to talk about. I'm going to put this book down now. Exploratory play is interesting because it does mean going to a location. It means being out in the world, and I suppose different ways that we engage with this play also mean exploring in the wider sense. So to try new foods, to read new books. I'll emphasize it again. It's exploring with the mind. It's having a way to play with ideas and with language. It's having a way to intellectually venture into new territory. Of course, if you're reading for healing and you get into a flow state where 4 hours goes by just like that, you're being playful. You may have been obsessively, intensely absorbed in the process, and it might have been quite shocking at times if you read a book recommended in this series, but you are ultimately being playful. I don't know how valuable it's going to be for me to go into each example too much. You get the idea. There's 5 play personalities. Play in itself is a regular, default form of human socialization that some of us had to a healthy, expected degree, and others amongst us had to a significantly impaired degree. How does this all come back to the thrust of the message of this video, that you should play to heal yourself? Well, my invitation to you is to consider the possibility of what would happen if you took the concept of inner child work and you made it a tangible, embodied promise. We've discussed inner child work in this series before. What if you made that a promise in time to yourself every day? 10 minutes, maybe not enough. Half an hour, pretty good amount. An hour would be ideal if you've got the time. If not every day, once a week. Let that inner child play, and play in a way that makes sense for it. For me, I play in different ways every day. Nature play is good for me. It's exploratory and it's tactile. I like to go for walks barefoot. It calms my nervous system. I get to experience that wide peripheral gaze where you relax your eyes and stop looking at something within arm's reach like a book or a screen. And sometimes I might speak to a person that I know nearby, like a local dog walker who's double my age, pet a dog. Exploration, something novel. Of course, exploratory play and physical play, there's sexual play, there's other elements that are more adult. But if you bring it all back to regulation theory and the idea that human beings self-regulate the high highs and the low lows by being in more of a flow state where they ride the wave, play is a great example of how to do that in a small, contained sense where you give yourself the permission and the freedom to be you, exploring, non-achieving, just playing. It's a radical concept, and it also has a pathology element to it. Of course, it can go way too far, almost like the shadow of play, where you become a perpetual Peter Pan or a fairy in the woods who avoids adult responsibilities. That's not what I'm recommending. What I'm recommending is you have a healthy way of integrating some of that energy frequently so that you don't do an overblown opposite shadow attack, which is something I've discussed on this channel before. I think in the episode on hostile imagination, where we live a certain polarity way too extremely. This is the example of a midlife crisis I'm painting out. A man works for 25 years in a career to provide success and status rewards to his family, friends, and to himself. And then suddenly at age 45, he has a playful burst where he wants to buy a brand new sports car and go and do crazy things that end up injuring him, like skydiving or jet skiing, and he's clearly out of shape. He hasn't been embodied for over 2 decades, and then he screws himself up. That's the overblown opposite. But what if that man, when he was 25 or 30, what if that woman, when she's in her early 30s and has the mundane responsibilities of something like mothering or a career that she looks after, still finds a way to go and play in the forest in a conscious, intentional adult way, which nonetheless includes the inner child who's been neglected? This is how we do embodied parts work. This is how we work at that multi-level internal conflict, and we don't allow internal combustion to even bubble up. We don't suppress that desire for playful release to a point where it needs a compulsive outlet. This is where modern hookup culture kind of taps into. A man who is obsessed with work will go on a dating app or go down to the club to play. The reality is, in most cases, he's actually coming from a place of wounding, a place of insecurity, and a place of hurt where he needs a play partner, if you catch my drift, to release some of the tension that he's built up inside of himself from rejecting himself over the course of the week, and the level of depth he can actually get to with that play partner is very superficial, especially if intoxicants are involved. It's the image of a play. It's not real playfulness. There might be a moment, a second, a minute of playful interaction where two strangers smile at each other and you actually get a genuine moment, but then reality kicks in and you have nothing in common and you've just hurt your body and hurt their body, and now you've got, some would say, an etheric cord that ties you together for life. That's neither here nor there. Invitation for this video is to be more playful to serve your brilliance. It doesn't mean going out and being a crazy whack job in the woods every single day. Maybe some would call me that kind of person. It means honoring the ability to be playful in service of healing the body, allowing the mind calm down, to find that high highs and low lows are not destiny, but we can learn to self-regulate via a variety of experiential adventures via the world of play on a weekly basis. Next episode in this series is going to be taking the idea of play straight to the idea of pleasure, and we're going to be reading this 50-year-old book about bioenergetics to show you, and hopefully convince you, that bodily pleasure is the foundation for fine thoughts. We're going to look at how the nervous system and how trauma stored in the body will filter our thoughts and color them with trauma until the moment that we're willing to re-access the joy of being alive, which is possible. Next episode of Inner Work Essentials, we're going to learn about pleasure, and I'll see you over there.